So as Alice says, I'm Jo Smith. I work for the Organic Research Centre. We're based down in Newbury. And I've been there for about 10 years researching agroforestry. So what is agroforestry? I mean, it's one of those terms we see increasingly nowadays, and everyone's got an idea of what it means, but it's fairly difficult to pin it down. At its simplest level, it's just trees on farms. But that means that a lot of our countryside is agroforestry. I mean, the pictures that Jeremy showed, there's trees in pretty much all of those. So I think in a way we have to think beyond simple trees in the landscape. And this is where this definition comes in useful. It's talking about land use systems in which trees and shrubs are grown in association with crops, pastures, with or without livestock. And we talk about ecological interactions, so the environmental benefits, but we should think about going that one step further and looking at the economic interactions as well. So there's perhaps two different approaches we can think about here. We can think about making better use of existing woody resources. For example, harvesting existing hedgerows to get a product such as wood chip for bioenergy or for improving soil fertility. Or we can think about designing new systems, so taking it a step further again and increasing the complexity of our system and integrating trees very closely with crops or livestock. We usually then go on to split agroforestry in two different systems. We talk about trees and livestock as silvopastoral systems and trees and crops as silvo-arable. And of course you can integrate livestock into silvo-arable systems, and that's where it becomes really fun. But it's not a new thing, really. If you look back in time, we have lots of examples of traditional agroforestry systems in the UK. We can think about hedgerows, which are not just simple boundary features, but at one point they provided a whole wealth of products for the local population, as well as their livestock proof barriers. They also provided timber, wood fuel, fruit, nuts, you name it. Orchards traditionally would have been grazed to manage the grass underneath. And we've got some beautiful examples of parkland systems where we have these veteran trees here dotted across the landscape with grazing animals underneath. If you think about systems like National Park in the New Forest, these are grazed woodlands where the pigs are run through to eat the acorns and then follow through with cattle and horses. Another type of agroforestry system, which is more a forested system, would be forest gardens. Now, this just looks like a forest, but every part of this has a role to play and it's very productive, but it's also quite labour intensive and knowledge intensive as well. And these work well, particularly on a small scale, particularly working with communities as well. Perhaps the most famous example is lovely mature forest garden down near Totnes. Martin Crawford here, he has a beautiful website with lovely books available talking about the different species you can use at every level of the forest garden. We can also think about agroforestry playing a role in protecting the environment. The key one is as a riparian buffer, so protecting watercourses from runoff from agriculture. Shelter belts, so protecting livestock and crops from wind. And hedgerows playing that important role of connecting areas of semi-natural woodland, so playing a role in promoting biodiversity. Now we come on to these more integrated systems, more novel systems. So here are some examples of silvopastoral agroforestry in the UK, ranging from ash and sheep in the top left, more of an alley cropping approach with a whole diversity of nuts and fruits in the top right, reintroducing grazing into modern orchard systems. Don't know if you can see there's a little picture there of a pig. This is in mid Wales, where the farmer has some young forestry and he was using the pigs to control weeds in that system. And perhaps one of the most famous or most widespread system in the UK are the silvo-poultry systems, the woodland egg production system where the poultry producers have to have a certain area of the land covered by trees. Happy chickens. This is actually our farm down in Berkshire. It's an 85 hectare farm on heavy clay soils. Livestock farm, did have cattle there, we've now got sheep. And looking at that, there's a lot of trees in the landscape. We've got a nice parkland system up to the right, which is on the neighbouring estate. And working with the Woodland Trust, we've been looking at three elements of improving the productivity of this system. So first of all, we've planted new hedges and new trees. So these new hedges, they're not kind of the bog standard hedgerow mix of thorns, they're actually a productive coppicing system where we can produce wood fuel from those. We're looking at generating the next generation of veteran trees, landscape trees, by planting trees within the fields, as well as creating a nice landscape feature of a tree avenue with fruit and timber species in there. We're actually looking to use the existing hedgerow network to provide a product, so not just having to manage it by flailing, but actually getting an economic return from that by coppicing on a 15-year rotation to generate wood chip to heat the farmhouse. And then we've also established a new silvopastoral system, which is short rotation coppice, willow and alder on the alley cropping system, with pasture in the alleys, which has either been producing silage or we've had the cattle grazing in there as well, just managing the tree interaction with electric fencing. Moving on to silvo arable systems, we tend to think of silvo arable as alley cropping to allow machinery access, but the tree can be producing all sorts. So in the top left is a coppice system, producing wood chip for bioenergy. Top right is Stephen's system, you'll hear a lot more about that in a while, but that's producing fruit. Got timber production in the bottom right, and then a really diverse system in the bottom left where there's a bit of everything. There's fruit, there's timber, there's bioenergy, and that's got a rotation of vegetables going around, organic vegetables. Just as an example, this is the Wakelands Agroforestry site, perhaps one of the most mature agroforestry systems in the UK, where Martin Wolf and his wife established a whole very complex system, and we've been carrying out research up there for the last 20 years. We've got three main systems, willow coppice and a hazel coppice. So the willow is twin rows of willow with about 10 to 12 metres of cropping alley, and this is coppiced every 2 years, as opposed to kind of 3 years that most standard short rotation coppice willow is cut on. The hazel coppice, as you hopefully can see from that little picture, twin rows again, but only one side is cut in 1 year, and it's done on a 5-year rotation. Also produces nuts occasionally, but the main product is really the wood chip. And this goes into a wood chip boiler that heats the farmhouse. And then there's a mixed hardwood and fruit tree system, which has got 7 different species of timber tree and apples as well, lots of different varieties of apples, and again on this kind of 10 to 12 metre alley. And within the alleys we've got organic crop rotation goes around. At one point we had chickens there as well, so producing eggs and doing a good job of cleaning up the pests. This is again a picture from Stephen's, but I won't really talk about this because I'm sure we're going to talk about it in detail. But it's just to show really that you can scale it up, so the alleys are much wider, reducing the kind of competition between the trees and the crops. So Alice asked me also to touch on the benefits of trees on farms, and it's a lovely publication there which also sets it out. So we can think about lots of benefits. There's also issues of introducing trees on farms in terms of increasing complexity, but let's have a look at the benefits first. So climate change, shade and shelter, soil and water management, biodiversity and productivity. In terms of agroforestry and climate change, we can think about 2 aspects. Firstly, we can think about mitigation, which is kind of offsetting the issues of climate change. Obviously, planting trees into arable system in particular, you're increasing the carbon storage in that system, both within the tree, within the woody biomass, and also below ground. And that's a key benefit. Obviously, it depends on what you do with the tree. If you're making furniture, if you're building houses, that carbon is locked up long term. If you're then burning it, it's kind of offsetting the use of fossil fuels, so it's more of a substitution role. So if you're burning it, you're then looking at reducing fossil fuel consumption, and we also talk about agroforestry reducing greenhouse gas emissions such as nitrous oxide. So tree roots actually take up nutrients from the soil, nitrogen from the soil, and return it via leaf litter, so it reduces the need for nitrogen inputs. We could also think about trees having a role in adaptation to climate change, so it reduces the impact of extreme weather events such as heavy rain, high winds. It's providing greater habitat diversity to support biodiversity. So as biodiversity has to adapt to changes in temperature and in weather, it gives them more habitat to move around and survive. And also diversification of enterprises to reduce risk. So you're getting a greater range of products from these systems. So rather than putting all your eggs in one basket, you're spreading the risk there. Moving on to shade and shelter, this is a key benefit for agricultural systems. Think about the microclimate regulation. So trees actually reduce wind speeds in an area 20 to 30 times the height of the windbreak. And this is particularly important for vegetable crops as well as for livestock. This can lead to increased growth rate and quality, protection from wind-blown soil, moisture management, soil protection, and the extended growing season. It also increases the flowering periods of the plants and bee activity, leading to increased fruit set and earlier maturity. If we think about the animals, shade perhaps is becoming increasingly important in the UK. So providing shade, this reduces the energy needed for livestock by regulating their body temperature, which then leads to higher feed conversion and weight gain. So some research in the States found that cattle with shade reach their target weight 20 days earlier. So obviously there's feed savings there. So the flip side of that is also providing shelter. And the effects of wind reduction by trees can increase the minimum temperature by 2 to 3 degrees centigrade, and this can provide important protection for newborn lambs and shorn sheep, again leading to savings in feed costs and better survival. Moving on to soil and water management. So one of the key features of agroforestry systems by integrating trees into the system is that trees have deeper roots than crops, and there's this idea of a safety net. So the trees basically mop up any of the nutrients being lost or leached from the crops, returns it back to the topsoil through leaf fall. This is a key benefit of planting riparian buffers, where research has shown that this can lead to a 70 to 90% reduction for suspended solids, 60 to 98% reduction for phosphorus, and 70 to 95% for nitrogen. And again, this is returning it back into the cropping system. Biodiversity. So you're increasing the complexity of your system, both in terms of species and in terms of structure. So this increase in plant biodiversity has benefits to associated biodiversity, so the other species that live within that habitat. And this is important particularly for IPM, when you think about the impact on beneficial insects such as pollinators, natural enemies, so pest control, and also decomposers. I love the pictures of the earthworms, great. But there's also a knock-on effect that by having this kind of permanent vegetation strip, there are sometimes increases in some pests such as slugs. Whether that leads to damage is another matter. We've got a PhD student who's looking at that at the moment. So some of the evidence to support that, this is the diverse system, vegetable system with different trees in the system. We spent a lot of time digging up earthworms there, and we found the bar on the left is the earthworm abundance in the tree row, and then going out into the cropping alley where abundance was much lower. So this permanent kind of tree row is like a reservoir for biodiversity, from where they can then spread that back out into the alleys. So this is an organic vegetable system. It'll have a couple of years of lay, which is when the earthworms can move back out. In terms of pollinators, this was another PhD study, and Alexa found that pollinators, including bumblebees, solitary wasps and hoverflies, were much higher in the agroforestry, the bars on the left, compared to a control with no trees. This was a master's project which was carried out at Stephen's farm, looking at the distribution of an important predator, ground beetles. And what she found, if you look at the top graph, it shows the distribution of beetles compared to distribution in a neighbouring field without trees. And whilst there's a hotspot of abundance in the arable system, you can see that in the agroforestry system, the beetles are more evenly spread. So they, again, probably using the tree rows as their kind of main habitat for shelter, and then running out into the alleys to perform their pest control. Finally, moving on to productivity. I mean, there's a whole range of products you can get from agroforestry systems. Obviously there's the agricultural production, so you've got food there. You can obviously have top fruit and nuts. But in terms of the woody component, there's loads of different potential products, including fuel, leaf fodder, so tree fodder, timber, thatching material, garden material, medicinal products potentially, and actually increasing the kind of recreational value of the landscape. One of the kind of central hypotheses in agroforestry is this idea of higher productivity from the system, and that's based on the idea that trees are accessing resources that crops alone cannot. So they're reaching much further down into the soil profile and obviously three-dimensionally above ground as well. And so there's complementarity there. And this leads to higher productivity when the system is managed well. We talk about this using a land equivalent ratio, which is a little bit tricky sometimes to get your head around, but it's the ratio of the area needed under sole cropping to the area of intercropping at the same management level to obtain a particular yield. So this graph shows the land equivalent ratio of different agroforestry systems. The line going from 1 to 1 means that the agroforestry system will be producing the same as a monocropping system, and you can see that these various agroforestry systems sit above that line, so they're more productive overall than a monocropping system. And we find that this land equivalent ratio varies across the, or throughout the maturing of the agroforestry system. So in the early days when the trees are small, there's a higher land equivalent ratio of about 1.6. And then as the trees get bigger, there's more shading, for example, and this will drop off to about 1. But if you average it over the lifetime of the agroforestry system, we're talking about a land equivalent ratio of 1.2. To put this into kind of figures on the ground, this means that 4 hectares of agroforestry would produce the same as 5 hectares of sole crops. In terms of the economics of agroforestry, there are financial benefits to be had, and these are as a consequence of increasing diversity and productivity of the system. But it's much longer term thinking needed. So higher long-term returns because you've got the tree component in there compared to an agricultural system, but actually you get you recoup these initial costs of planting more quickly than in a forestry-only system. Back to the diverse agroforestry system with vegetables. So the farmer here has gone one step further, so rather than just being happy with his trees and his crops in the alley, he's actually using that understory space to grow more crops. So he's diversifying his system even further. He's got shade-tolerant species such as rhubarb. He's also growing daffodil bulbs for cut flowers as well. And that sounds great, but obviously that means more labour, there's more products to manage, there's more markets to manage. It fits very well with this kind of direct sales to customers. You can also make jams and so on from those products. So increasing complexity, it's great in a number of ways, but there is a management issue associated with that. Can be a challenge. Just wanted to put this example up. This is down at Dartington College. I'm not sure if people are aware of it, but one of the main challenges that we find talking to farmers about agroforestry is it's new designs, new management, and people don't necessarily have the skills or the knowledge about the trees that they're integrating into the system. So some of the old agroforestry systems that we work with, the tree really hasn't been managed to its full potential. It hasn't been pruned properly, or harvesting hasn't happened when it should have done. And so one way to address this problem is to look more at a partnership approach, where you have people responsible for the agriculture and people responsible for the trees, experts in both. And this is an example down at Dartington. Stephen advised on this, and it's a nice complicated picture, but basically we've got 3 main tree crops in. We've got apples, we've got elderflower, and we've got Sichuan pepper, which I think is the first commercial crop of Sichuan pepper in the UK. So in terms of the apples, that's going into a fruit box system managed by a veg grower. The elderflower is going to Luscombe Drinks to make some elderflower bubbly, and the Sichuan pepper is going to salthouse and peppermongers to go into their business. This partnership approach is great, but obviously it's about people working together. So it's a different type of challenge, I guess. Just to point you in the direction of more information, both Stephen and I are working on a European project, which is Agroforestry Innovation Networks. We've run a series of workshops aimed at kind of 3 different approaches to agroforestry, so silver arable group, silver pastoral group and silver horticultural group. And these are the dates of the next workshops spread across the country. So silver arable group will be meeting 5th and 6th of June up in Scotland as part of the Farm Woodland Forum annual meeting. Silver pastoral group, the next one will be on the 2nd of July on the Claydon estate in Buckinghamshire. And the 15th of August we're up in Northumberland looking at silver horticultural system. So you're very welcome to join us at any of those. And a few pointers here for further information. AgForward was a 4-year research project led by Cranfield University, but they've produced some lovely technical notes which are available online. Agroforestry, that was a project Stephen was involved with, again, resources online there. Agroforestry Research Trust is Martin Crawford's website down in Dartington. Farm Woodland Forum is the UK's Agroforestry Association, so it's a group of like-minded individuals who get together for their annual meeting every year. Some people there have been working on agroforestry for kind of 30-40 years, so a lot of information and knowledge there. AFNet project I've just mentioned, and there's some fact sheets we've produced at the back there. And I'm also Secretary for the European Agroforestry Federation, which is basically an umbrella which brings together the agroforestry associations from across Europe, and lots of resources online there. And I think that's it. Sorry, I'm kind of running out of voice here, suffering a bit from a lurgy.